Parte 1. The patient in room 6A. I didn't take the job for the money. I took it because it was quiet. Hospitals at night are not what people think. There's no shouting, no codes being called every 5 minutes, no drama. Just white noise. Machines beeping steadily. HVAC systems breathing through vents. Maybe a nurse humming through a mask in the next unit over. That's what I liked. After what happened to me last year, the divorce, the fire, the lawsuit, I needed quiet. So when the listing came up from Beringer Medical in Indianapolis, I applied immediately. Overnight caretaker needed. Non-medical observation. 1 patient. Private wing. $720 a week. Light documentation. No lifting. Must be discreet. It sounded like hospice, but it wasn't. It was worse. And I didn't understand how strange it all was until I met the man in room 6A. His name was Thomas Beckett, born August 14th, 1967, comatose since November 3rd. 1995. That's 28 years. 28 years without waking up. 28 years without blinking, speaking, eating, or reacting. Except last week, he moved. And now they needed someone to watch him. I met with the facility director on my first day, a quiet man named Halverson, who smelled like coffee and formaldehyde. He's harmless, he said, walking me down the long, dim hallway that led to the restricted wing. Then why the security lock? I asked. He didn't answer. We reached a metal door marked with a keypad and the number 6A. Halverson typed in the code, 031195, the day Beckett went under. Only you and I have this, he said. Inside, the room was colder than the rest of the building, almost uncomfortably so. There was a single bed, a reclining chair, a vitals monitor, and Thomas Beckett. He looked normal. That's what disturbed me. No oxygen mask, no feeding tube, no bed sores. He looked like a man taking an afternoon nap. Skin smooth, hair graying at the temples, hands folded neatly over a blanket. But his eyes were half open, not wide, just cracked, like he was peeking, like he'd been peeking for a very long time. Vitals are stable, Halverson said. Heart rate 61, BP 117/72, temp 96.7. Hasn't changed since 95. Wait, I said. He hasn't aged? Oh, he's aged, but not biologically. We think the metabolic rate dropped to near zero, almost cryonic. We don't understand it. I turned back toward the bed. Beckett's eyes didn't move, but I swear they were looking straight at me. What do I do? I asked. Just observe, Halverson replied. Log any changes. Don't interfere. That was the first red flag. The second was the camera. Mounted in the corner, pointing directly at the bed. But the cord was cut. Does that thing record? I asked. Halverson didn't respond. He just said, Beckett's world is very small. Just the bed, the walls, you. And then he left. The first night was uneventful. I sat in the chair and wrote in the logbook. 9 p.m., vitals normal. No movement. 12 a.m., same. 3 a.m., patient's eyes seemed drier than before. No blinking. I felt like I was babysitting a wax statue. At 4:12 a.m., the light in the room flickered once. Not uncommon in old buildings. But when I looked up from my notes, Beckett's hand had shifted. Just slightly, 2 fingers out of place, like he'd twitched. I watched for 10 minutes. Nothing else. Wrote it down, went home. The second night, I brought a thermos of coffee and a small notebook of my own. Started sketching the layout of the room, where the shadows fell, how the IV lines curled along the wall. It helped me stay awake. At 2:47 a.m., I looked up and saw that Beckett's head was turned. Just a little, facing me, his eyes still half open, but now they were aimed right at my chair. I didn't hear him move, didn't see it happen. He was just looking. I stood up, approached the bed. His pupils didn't track, his lips didn't move, but I could hear something, a sound. Low and soft and wet, like a tongue trying to form a shape in a dry mouth. Then, nothing. I called Halverson the next morning. His head moved, I said. Pause. And his hand. Possibly his tongue. Pause. You're sure it wasn't a muscle spasm? Not a chance. He sighed. Then, he's waking up. Part second, whisper. I came back early that night, not because I was eager, because I was afraid someone else might be watching him too. The hallway to room 6A was quiet as ever. Fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, casting long, sterile shadows. The keypad beeped. I entered the code, and the door clicked open. He was sitting up, just slightly, not fully, but the incline of his head, the tension in his neck, he was no longer lying flat. The vitals were steady, BP normal, oxygen good, but the logbook had a new entry, not in my handwriting. 2:42 p.m. Patient mouthed a word, looked toward corner. No one else was supposed to be here. No shift nurses, no day observer, and there was no name signed under the note. Just a long horizontal line, as if someone had dragged the pen across the paper instead of writing. I watched him all night, didn't blink, didn't write, just sat in the chair with a pen clutched in my fist and stared. Nothing happened until 3:13 a.m. He made a noise, not a groan, not a breath, a whisper. One word. Back. Not loud, not strained, calm, like someone remembering or returning. I stood, approached the bed. Thomas? I said, softly. His eyes didn't move, his lips were still, but the sound repeated. Back. This time, behind me. I turned. No one was there. But something had changed. The shadows on the wall were wrong. Longer, sharper, and there was something written on the dry erase board behind the door. I hadn't noticed it before. In red marker, tell him not to come back. He'll want to bring it with him. The next day, Halverson called me into his office. I need you to sign an addendum to your contract, he said. Why? Privacy protocols. He slid a thick envelope across the desk. Addendum B7. Non-disclosure of cross-personal manifestation incidents. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He leaned back. Sometimes patients in extended comas form pathways. To what? He didn't answer, just said, You're not the first caretaker we've hired. You are the only one who stayed past the third night. What happened to the others? Another pause. Then, some of them left. One never left the room. That night, I brought a camera. Not my phone. They didn't allow those. A small digital recorder, old school. I set it up in the corner of the room at a wide angle, let it run all night. Beckett didn't move, or so I thought. At 6 a.m., I reviewed the footage. For the first 5 hours, nothing. Just quiet, still, boring observation. Then, at 3:14 a.m., the image rippled, like heat distortion. The lights flickered, and the camera shook. Then on the screen, Beckett sat upright, fully. No transition, no motion blur, just upright. Eyes open, mouth moving. Then he pointed toward the camera and smiled, a wide, toothless smile. Then he leaned forward and whispered directly into the lens, "You're watching the wrong one." The screen went black. Parte tres, the wrong one. I tried to show the footage to Halverson. He refused to watch it, just stared at the USB stick in my hand like it was a gun. "Destroy it," he said. "Why?" His jaw tightened. "Because once you see what's behind the face, it doesn't go back to sleep." I didn't destroy it. I took it home. That night, I watched the video again, frame by frame. At 3:14 a.m., just before the distortion, something else happened. Beckett blinked. A full, slow blink. First time in 28 years. His eyes changed too, just slightly. The pupils elongated, vertical slits, like a goat or a reptile. Just for a second, then back to normal. Or what passed for normal in that room. I paused the video at the exact moment he whispered into the camera. Tried to read his lips, but they weren't speaking English. The movements were wrong, too smooth, too deliberate, like muscle memory from a language not spoken on this side of the mirror. The next night, room 6A was colder. I could see my breath when I entered. Beckett was lying flat again, eyes half closed, but something was off. There was a mark on his hand, a symbol, drawn in pen, 3 concentric circles with a vertical line through the center. I checked the logbook. Nothing new. But in my own notebook, which I hadn't brought the night before, the same symbol had been drawn over and over again. Dozens of times, pages filled with it. My handwriting. But I had no memory of writing any of it. At 2:58 a.m., Beckett spoke again. "Don't look at me." I turned toward the bed. He hadn't moved, but his lips were wet, twitching. "Don't look at me." I asked why. "Because it's not me anymore." The lights dimmed, the room tilted, not physically, but perceptually. Like gravity leaned sideways. And for a split second, the walls weren't walls anymore. They were mouths, open, silent, watching. I ran. Out the door, down the hall, out of the building, into the night air, panting, shaking, not even caring if I lost the job. But the next morning, I was back, because something had changed in me too, and I needed to know what it was. Parte cuatro, what watches back. I arrived early. Room 6A was locked. The keypad rejected the code. I knocked, no answer. Then the door opened by itself. Beckett was sitting up again, smiling. This time with teeth, but they weren't human teeth. They were too small, too many, more like bristles or needles, perfect and symmetrical, forming an arc that never blinked. I stepped back. He didn't follow, didn't move, just watched me, and I understood something in that moment. Not in words, but in weight. That whatever was sitting in the bed wasn't pretending to be Thomas Beckett. It was wearing him. I went to Halverson's office. He was already waiting. "You've seen it," he said. I nodded. "What is it?" He rubbed his temples. "We don't know. Some say it's extra-dimensional. Others neurological. A parasite of thought. Maybe a mirror that thinks it's a man. You kept it alive." He didn't flinch. "We don't know how to kill it. That night, I brought salt, a circle of it, books I didn't believe in until now. I placed wards, chanted prayers, lit candles, desperate measures in a sterile room. Beckett watched me the entire time, didn't speak, didn't blink, until I finished the circle. Then he whispered, "Now you've invited me twice." The lights exploded, the circle caught fire, and he stood, fully, first time in nearly 3 decades. And I understood, with perfect clarity, what Rule 1 had been: never speak to him first. Part 5, The Return Path. He stood motionless inside the burning salt ring, not screaming, not reacting, just watching me, as if fire wasn't real to him, as if none of this was real to him. The lights in room 6A didn't come back on. They flickered once more, then stayed dead. The door shut itself behind me, and for the first time, I heard his real voice, not through his mouth, but in my head. There are no rules in my world, only remembering. I backed into the corner. My hands trembled. I looked for the emergency call button. Gone. No cameras, no intercom. Just the sound of him stepping through the salt without breaking the circle. He didn't walk. He glided. And when he reached the edge of the bed, he looked straight through me. Not metaphorically, literally. I saw my own spine reflected in his pupils. Then the walls shifted. They didn't melt. They inverted, as if the entire room turned inside out, becoming an observation cell that had always been watching me. Inside the ceiling, I saw the shadow of myself sitting in a chair, smiling, taking notes, blinking in sync with Beckett. "There is no coma," the voice said, "only rehearsal. You've been learning to forget how to leave." The next moment, I was back in the hallway. The door behind me was sealed. Room 6A no longer existed, just a blank wall with no number. Halverson was gone. The nurse's station was empty. The floors glowed too white, like bone. When I looked in the mirror above the drinking fountain, I didn't blink, and my reflection didn't breathe. Parte 5, remembre. I tried to leave the hospital. The elevator didn't work. The stairs didn't go down. Every floor I reached looked like the same one I left. Same flickering light above the fire exit. Same dried smear of something dark on the tile near the window. I turned corners, and ended up in front of the same door every time. 6A. Except now, it wasn't just a room. It was a shape that knew my name. Inside, nothing. Not a bed, not a monitor, just space. And on the far wall, a chair. Facing the opposite wall, where a mirror once hung. A mirror that no longer showed anything, because it was already inside me. I heard the voice again. "You didn't come to observe. You came to replace." And I remembered something I'd never lived. Another caretaker, another name, another body, sitting in this chair before me, watching, and slowly forgetting how they got there, how long they'd been there. I sat, not because I wanted to, because I didn't remember how to stand. The lights flickered once, then stayed steady. In front of me, a new door formed. From nothing, painted beige, stainless handle. A nameplate being etched as I watched. Thomas Beckett. Caretaker. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, I saw myself through the mirror, smiling faintly, pen in hand, logbook open, behind the glass. A new figure lay in the bed, eyes half open, just beginning to wake, and I understood the truth. There was never one Beckett. There was never one Coma. Only a cycle. Only a role. Only the watching. The end.